Hello. Thank you for coming today. I guess my name's Jeremy Mendes. I'm going to adhere to these notes a little bit. I'm going to describe some of the history of the film board and give you a little backstory on how we've come to make digital projects at the film board. A little bit about myself first, I guess. I've been working in interactive storytelling for about 12 years. I was fortunate enough to fall into it almost right away. I was working in Flash in 97 or 98. Did some direction at an animation studio, and pretty much entirely have been dealing with story the entire time I've been working in interactive. A little bit about the film board. The interactive stuff that I'm going to show you was kicked off by a director named Rob McLaughlin, who spoke at IDFA last year. Is that right? 2 years ago? Yeah. He's left the film board now. I've been following him for a decade. He's an incredible mind. We worked at the CBC together for 4 years on a project called Radio 3, which I have linked to from my website. It's all been re-archived. It was an interactive magazine that was pretty much quite ahead of its time. It featured music and stories about artists and Canadians, and it was in a format that was full screen, like reminiscent of some of the stuff I'm going to show you today. Yeah, it was a really exciting project. It was really cool to be a part of, and it was heartbreaking when the CBC decided to pull the plug on it. I'm not exactly sure. Well, I have some ideas, but I won't get into that today. But yeah, so I was back in advertising for a few years, like 3 or 4 years, and then this interactive opportunity came up at the film board, and I was asked to come and join them from the inception of the project. So I've been really fortunate to be involved in the work that we've done. Is this bad? Is this bad? This is okay? This is okay, here we go. Oh, okay. Okay, I'll tell you a little bit about the National Film Board. We're one of the few remaining public producers in the world. We've been around for 70 years, and it's I don't know how well, I mean, it has a global reputation. I think in Canada, as a Canadian, you grow up on the film board. Late night television, you're laughing. Yeah. Did you see it?
Oatmeal with film board.
What's that?
Oatmeal with film board.
Oatmeal with film board, yeah. Mooses and the Arctic and Eskimos and, well, Inuit people. And great animation, Ryan Larkin, Norman McLaren. All these things are, if you're Canadian, they're kind of in your blood. If you're an artist, you grow up seeing all this stuff. So it's a great brand to work for in Canada. And when you're working with artists, it's a great benefit too, because, you know, if you're working for something, if you have a startup and you're called Zammy or something and you want to work with Stan Douglas or something like that, they don't want to work with you because they don't know who you are. But with the film board, it's tried and true, and you pretty much, you have the door open to work with almost any artist you want. And I'll get into that a little later, but that's kind of how we work on these interactive projects with different artists. So 4 years ago, the NFB was kind of in a place where new Canadians didn't really know who they were. They weren't online at all. They have an extensive library of like 1,300 films, or 13,000 films, sorry. And even if you're in a city like Montreal or Vancouver where they have an office, to get your hands on a copy of one of these old Norman McLaren videos or Bill Mason's epic canoeing adventure videos, which are fantastic if you want to check that out. They're on the website. So they made a big move to migrate everything online, and this started to get the film board thinking about the internet and how they can reach a broader audience with the internet. So while this project was nearing completion, they had .com mobile devices, and there's an iPhone app as well that you can download that gives you access to this whole library. That in some ways it was a bit retro, looking back at these films that had already been made, but not necessarily thinking about how interactive was going to move forward. What was next for interactive? So they hired Rob, and we started working on projects that would be sort of how content would be designed or be next for the internet. It's still very Canadian focused. It's all about connecting to Canadians and producing socially relevant content for Canadians. We try as hard as we can to kind of think that these projects will be relevant to other cultures, but like anything, cultures are very, they're broad, so if you try to kind of capture too much, you stand the chance of like watering down your ideas. So we do have a focus on Canada. It's the Canadian Film Board. It's about Canadian identity, but our hope is that these pieces are compelling to not just North Americans, but Europeans and everyone else in the world. So it's all about technology. It's all about the internet. And experimentation. We generally, the way we work is pairing with artists. So right now I have 3 projects I'm working on. One artist is a filmmaker, documentary filmmaker. He's based in Kabul. Another project is a Vancouver artist who does video installation. And there's a filmmaker that I'm working with that has trail camera photos from Banff National Park. And all these relationships are very different, and it's the exciting part of the job because you get to meet new people and you get to kind of examine new processes. Every project's completely different. When we have a project comes to the door, there's not a formula that we apply to it. It's what is this story? What is this medium? What is the artist coming to us with? And we try to kind of find the best way to facilitate their process and to honor their art form and their creativity without kind of taking it over and making it a film board experience, but just to really develop the artist's own voice and in the most in the clearest channel or the clearest way forward. But it's not as straightforward as that. It's not like they come in and they tell us what we want to do. We have to, as experts in interactive and internet, we have to kind of foster their idea, but we have to encourage them to push the envelope. And a lot of what we're doing at the Film Board in interactive is very experimental. And it's kind of like the scary part of the work we're doing, because sometimes you could spend months and months and months on something, and we're trying to innovate. 3 years later, you look at it and you realize that you've come farther with other projects since. But it's exciting. It's exciting, and it's challenging and all that stuff. So pushing limits. So like I said, we do pair with artists. We try to find a good fit. Looking for producers that are doing digital work all across Canada, and sometimes we even look globally to make sure that fit is right. So, for example, this video artist I'm working with now, Robert Arndt, he's a very atypical artist. He's quirky. He's frustrating and easily frustrated, but he's very talented. He has a really bright vision, and artists are kind of new. Visual artists to adopt the internet as a form or as a stage. I personally love working with artists on these projects. I find that they have an openness to questioning the form of the media, the form of what it is. What is the internet? What does it mean to be online? Whereas with filmmakers, it's a little bit different. There's more of the inertia to develop a storyline in a linear narrative is greater, and not necessarily, I mean, I'm generalizing, I realize that, but I have found with artists that they do, part of their practice is to question the form. It's like installation artists that's working in a gallery space might, you know, this isn't brand new, but just as an example, they might want to think about how the space is a non-space, or how you could open a hole and cut a hole in the wall and move artwork through a hole in the wall into the outside as a reflection of their understanding of how that space operates and how it's relevant to the form of making artwork. And so, just to go back to what I was getting at with that, is that artists are interested in questioning the form, and it's frustrating for them. Robert likes to make 20-minute videos that have 19 minutes of somebody standing there, and then build this to this poignant moment. It's quite, they're very beautiful, and the punchline is in the last minute. And I think that's something that's something he realizes he has to let go of a little bit in this piece, because people just don't spend that kind of time online staring at someone sitting there for 20 minutes. In an art gallery, maybe you might do that. So I have 4 specific examples, only one of which I worked on personally, so I've been playing some catch up on how those pieces were put together. The reason why the 4 that I picked were all, I tried to pick stuff that I realized that there's a lot of photographers in the room. All the 4 pieces that I picked all deal with photography. I think more importantly too is that I picked a scale of them. I think that sometimes the feeling is that these pieces have to be so big. They have to be, you know, some of them, I'm working on one now for over a year. One of the ones here was a year and a half. Long production cycles, but 2 of them are very simple. And I think that the reason why I did that was I think it's important not to be discouraged by this form. You know, there's lots of ways to go about making interactive work. There's lots of tools online that are proprietary that you don't necessarily have to go into these production cycles. We do that because we can. We're dedicated, and we're investing a lot of money into these projects. But if you've got a great story to tell and you've got great images, there you go again. Yeah. There's no reason why you can't get your ideas online and out there. There's lots of forms that, you know, the most basic stuff like YouTube. And interestingly enough, there's always this push to kind of get our content relative to what's going on the internet. Why is it connected to the internet? And I've been excited lately about the idea of working with things like banner ads and YouTube, and breaking out of this form where you're on the NFB website. Like, how can you explore that space more completely and more fully? I think it's that kind of thinking that's really going to change the way we think about making interactive work online, the way we think about telling stories in this space. And it's hard to keep up with. The first piece I'm going to show you is called Please Call, very sentimental. It was created by Alicia Smith, who worked quite closely with Rob McLaughlin. The piece is about changing technology and what gets lost along the way. It asks us to consider the emotional attachment we put on photos, and what it means that they're now stored on transitory plastic devices, cell phones. There we go. Okay. I'll preface with one thing first before I show you this, is that design plays a huge role in the work that we do, it's a lot like it's a lot more in line with, say, how a magazine is made. When you make a film or a linear narrative, the art is all in the editing and the audio layering, and the quality of the images and the video. When you work with stuff like this, you'll see when I get rolling with it, but design plays a lot bigger role. Typography, color, layout, the tone you kind of embody the project with is pretty crucial, and I'll try to remember to kind of speak to design in all these when we roll them. So this is Please Call.
One new message.
Essentially, what this piece was, the birth of the idea of this project was the creator, Alicia, who works as a producer now in Winnipeg. She was at a garage sale and she found a bag of a few hundred vintage photographs. That's at the start of the top of the video piece. She pulls the bag out and lays a bunch of these down on the table. So I think that's a really important part of the discussion that you can have around a site like this, because it talks about like the birth of the idea, the moment of discovery that you get excited about. And I think it's always really important to stay connected to that moment when you're working on a piece like this. The scale of this is really, really small and it's simple, and it says a lot by layering different things together, and I think that's how this piece is successful. So she had this bag of photos and she didn't really know, she hadn't figured out what to do with them yet. And one day she was looking through Craigslist and she noticed that there was a disproportionate amount of Craigslist ads that people were looking for lost cell phones. And in the ads, they weren't so much concerned about getting the phone back, they wanted the pictures back that were on the phone. So she started to see this relationship between these lost images and technology, cell phones, and how we think about photos and how sentimentality has changed. Both moments have this sort of loneliness and this emotional connection you make. When you see these old pictures, a bag of photos that you think that your grandparents might have in their closet, somebody just gave them up or lost them. How did they get lost? And that's a lot how quite a few of these projects we do work. We kind of look at different layers of sentimentality. The audio, obviously, you can hear that plays a bit of a role. It's grainy, it loops, but it kind of gives you an emotional feeling. And all the pieces kind of work independently, but it's when you layer them together that they kind of start to communicate together to give you a more I don't say exciting, but just a deeper experience, and it's evocative, and it gets you thinking about what the relationship of these things are. What does it mean to have a cell phone? How things have changed. I don't even remember the last time I printed a roll of film, but especially the date of these films or these photographs that were taken in the 30s and 40s. The choice of presenting these images as a video loop, where her hand comes in and picks up the photos, I think is really a nice choice as well. It's just a little bit more unusual, and it kind of brings the viewer into the space of looking at these pictures in a more intimate way. If this had been cropped out and cut and put into a grid and all the images were laid out and you flipped them over and saw the notation, it'd be a much different experience. So it's these kind of choices on these projects that I think really differentiate them and make them strong, and through the process you're faced with those kind of questions all the time on how to present work. Okay, this one I'll breeze through pretty quickly. This piece is called Main Street. all these projects, we kind of approached the content from a different way, different types of artists. This was an existing body of work by Danny Singer, who does these beautiful big landscape photos that I'll show you slowly. The interesting story behind these, I think, more is just he's fascinated with the main streets of small towns. So we basically just took his huge, normally 12-foot high gallery pieces and scaled them down in a way that could be viewed one at a time in an interactive way. Layered sound and some simple design and interactivity to kind of make them more cohesive and together, and just think a little bit more about what it means to be in a small town in rural Canada. Released after the market closed yesterday, the reports show a further decline in the weekly crop. So you can filter them really simple. Like this piece was done for, you know, half a decline of 1% from the week prior. A pretty small amount of money, just a little bit of programming in Flash. There's some simple filtering you can do, picking images that are either in the winter or in the summer, and then you simply just look at the work in a more intimate way than you would as intimate as in a gallery. So you can kind of go along and explore these storefronts and get a feel for some of these small towns. It's just it's not that complicated. It doesn't pretend to be much more than that. The work's really strong. His process is all he carefully stitches these pictures together, and I think the interesting part of this is just the layering, how you have sound and image and a little bit of design and a story and a feeling about what it means to live in a small town like this, how these towns exist, when are they going to be gone. I'm going to move on to Pine Point. Pine Point was created by Michael Simons and Paul Shoebridge. Has anyone had a chance to see that project yet? Okay, Pine Point is an interesting one. It's done really well. It's won 2 Webby Awards and a Flash in the Can Award. It's had 100,000 unique visitors since its launch in January. It's an interactive documentary about what happens when you lose your job, when everyone you know loses their job, when your entire town is out of work, is shut down and dismantled, and it completely disappears. Welcome to Pine Point uncovers a place frozen in time and explores how our communities do more than define who we are. I'll just give you a little bit about it before I'll let a couple of the sections play. So essentially, the creators were really interested in photo albums, and they had this really great experience in a local taxidermy shop in Vancouver, where they met this guy who was the son of the guy who ran the taxidermy shop, and he had these old photo albums and was going through them, and there was a picture of this guy every day of his life with a different stuffed animal, giant gazelles, and I've been in the shop. It's really, really quite neat. And so they became interested in the quality of those photographs of where they place the person in time, the change in technology from having images, and so on. So they still hadn't really figured out exactly what they were going to do yet, and they stumbled across this website. Mike Simons was actually visited this town of Pine Point. Pine Point's a town up in a boom town in northern BC that was only existed for a few years. It was a boom town around a mine. The town was built. There was a bunch of people that went to high school there, and then the mine closed. The city was actually razed. It was gone. They completely removed it, and they found this website with pictures of people who went to high school there. So they started on this great journey of collecting images. And I think what's neat about this piece is that it really does embody the nature of interactivity and layering, and how you can kind of build something in a way that kind of just, it's part of the experience of discovering. As they dug more, they wound up finding videos of like people playing basketball in the gym and drinking booze in the pharmacy, and then they wound up tracking down some of the characters that had moved on to, moved left Pine Point, and they all had this very romantic idea about that time they spent in Pine Point. So they tried to capture this whole thing, and their main connection to the story was this character, Paul Cloutier, who you'll hear his voice at the top. He was kind of the bully in town, and he moved to Victoria, which is a town on the coast further down south, developed MS, and was bound to a wheelchair, and he does all his programming with voice control. So you'll hear his voiceover, but an intense amount of layering went into this piece. Both of the creators come from a print background. Did anyone here know Adbusters magazine? It's kind of a left-wing sort of critical magazine that kind of combines design and photography with a critique of culture and the excesses of culture. So they're really interested in the tactile. They created a huge amount of illustration and photographs and texture pieces to really kind of, they started to become the real visual energy for this piece. So I'll walk you through a couple sections that I urge you to kind of give it some time on your own. It's quite a beautiful piece. It's very emotional. The sound scoring is a huge.
Tab 579. Click. Mouse click. Backspace 10. And
So that's one chapter of Pine Point. I think that some of the strengths of this piece are just how nostalgia is obviously culturally relevant, so I don't know how that would work here in Holland, but the images that are very typical of what Canada looked like in the 80s. And they do a really good job of finding a beginning, middle, and end of the story. They have did a great job of sound and scoring. There's layers of video, you can go into pieces. There's collage work where there's video that's embedded into drawings and illustration, and all the layers all work together to really give you it has a lot of emotional impact, and I think that's what's really strong about this piece. It's considered to be pretty linear, with I guess you could call it interactive light, where you could see where I was clicking around on those illustrations of mustaches and color patterns and stuff, where the user can kind of spend as much time as they want in each section and kind of drill down into these layers, look at as many photos as they want. The music kind of carries the backbone and the emotion of the piece. And so it's sort of designed to kind of be looked at as in different passes. And I've spent time with this, gone through it a couple times, and I've had very different experiences both times. Yeah, it's a lot of just a really strong story to start with. Great sound, gives a good emotional impact, and design, just giving it a really solid feel all the way through. The last piece I'm going to talk to you probably has the most relevance in terms of photography. It's a project that I worked on about 1.5 years ago with a filmmaker named Diane Wheeland. I don't know who was in my, I can't see faces, but I did a session yesterday and went into quite a bit of depth on this piece. It's, pull it up here. This one I can kind of, I'll give you a bit of the background on it. So basically this woman, Diane Wheeland, went to a film festival in Whistler and saw this footage of the North. And I was speaking earlier with the nostalgia of NFB, the NFB, and there's dozens and dozens of film about the Arctic. Canadians are obsessed with the Arctic. And so she's just like as I've described, she saw some really great footage of snowmobiles racing across the tundra, and she knew she had to go. And this woman was extremely tenacious. She was a riot to work with. She's crazy. Within a year, she was there. She managed to convince the military to let her go on this trip as a photographer. And she didn't know what she was going to do with the footage. She didn't know what she was going to do with the pictures. She had an idea that she was going to make a film. And off she went, and she came back with this big pile of images, like tens of thousands of photos. SLR. I don't even know if she managed to take them all. I mean, shooting film and video in the Arctic is not easy. Battery life is about 5% of what it normally is when it's 60 below. And plus she was on a military convoy traveling through the Arctic, and her expectation was that she would be part of this convoy, which means digging everyone out of the snow and like driving 200 or 300 kilometers, 8 hours a day, just driving across the snow and trying not to die. So she came back to the film board with this big bag of film, and she wanted to make a movie, and luckily we just started, it was around the time we just started these interactive projects, and Rob thought it would be a good person to pair me with. So we had a lot of fun. It was not an easy project. There wasn't really much of a story when we started, and the challenge of that one was, again, just to get to the core of it. What was the story about? For her, the Arctic's a loaded subject. It's First Nations issues. Her as a woman, as a lesbian, hanging out with men, there was gender issues. There was how First Nations and the military were getting along. It was about the Canadian objective. It was about the ridiculousness of Canada's sovereignty patrols to go and stick a flag in the North Pole, just to say that it's ours. And meanwhile, there's Russian jets flying over, disputing our territory. And it's just a loaded issue, and she was excited about every aspect of it. And so trying to figure out what the story was and get it whittled down into something that could capture all these ideas and thoughts, but still kind of maintain a focus of some degree. So we just focused on the fact that it was a 16-day trip, and then it was about putting a flag up in the Arctic, not far from where the North Pole is, about 300 kilometers south or something like that. So this piece just became about focusing then onto these 16 days. We still were struggling with the story. She was really great. Everyone knows storytellers. They can, you can sit down and have a drink with them. They can tell you the most amazing story. You can record it and you go back and listen to it or play it with someone else, and it means nothing to them because you've lost that connection or that intimacy. So we struggled with that quite a bit to try to find a way to capture her voice and her excitement and her tenacity. And what we wound up doing was basically writing a script. She had a 90,000 word document that got dropped into my lap that I had to edit down to about 5,000 words. I'd spent a lot of time with her already, so I knew the story, so it was easy for me to kind of get my head around it. And then we went and had a woman named Alison Broddle, who was an executive producer at the CBC, script for radio. That's an important point. We're finding now with a lot of these pieces when we use narration, two or three of the projects that I'm working on have narration, and we use radio editors and radio script writers. The reason that we do that is because in a nonlinear environment, you can never be guaranteed what someone's going to be looking at. And sometimes you don't want to guarantee. You want to let people have time to kind of play and move around and look at different photographs. And with film, you can time things up, so when someone's talking about a suitcase, you've got a shot of the suitcase sitting on the bed. But if the dialogue is speaking to a suitcase, then you don't necessarily have to show the suitcase. Anyways, that's something to think about when you're doing audio for these pieces. The design layer we tried to kind of communicate as much as we could about the environment, about daylight, about the number of the distance traveled, the difficulty of what they were doing, and the audio is broken down into 16 sections, and each section kind of has its own theme. So you can come in and look at one or two pieces. You can see the map. You get the idea. You know that they're on snowmobiles. You know that there's a military mission. You know that they're going to go all the way to the top. So you get enough information from the design and the audio in each section to get the story, and you don't necessarily have to listen to all 50 minutes of the audio. If you get really sucked in, then you can. So that was sort of the thinking behind that piece when we made this. And I'll play a couple of sections from this land. Hang on here.
I desperately wanted to go north and not just see it all for myself, but photograph it, capture it somehow before it vanishes. I knew that every year a convoy of military snowmobiles traces a line across Canada's high Arctic, the theory being, if you don't patrol by land, it's difficult to say it's yours. Now, I'm not exactly a poster child for the Army. I'm a gay, scotch-drinking, pot-smoking photographer filmmaker. But I made a deal with the Canadian Rangers. If they took me along on one of their 2,000-kilometer treks from Resolute to Ellesmere Island, I'd use my cameras to tell the tale of how and why they do it. After a crash course on snowmobile riding and mechanics and much skeptical resistance, I thought I was ready.
One of the things that was interesting about this piece was, again, trying to guess how much time someone was going to want to spend in each section, how quickly they were going to click through photos, letting people interact with these images and look at them at their own pace. We had video clips and photos, so we wanted, you could see that some of the clips in the horizontal image selection were video clips, some of them were images. But the idea was that we would try to line up as much of the photography as we could to connect to what she was saying in the story. And then once you got past those, there was this massive amount of images that were all quite beautiful as well. So you could just keep looking and clicking through them. So we made a reservoir, basically, or a bucket. And when you went to the next chapter, if you looked at 10 of these bucket photos, then you'd start at 11 and continue on. So you could look at photos forever, really. And the photos were the hugest part of the thing. With all these projects, we always go back to this question, like, what is the story and what do we have? And in this piece, it was obviously this personality of Diane that we were trying to capture, the nature of her mission, and these incredible Arctic photos that she took. Yeah, I got to wrap it up, sign, which is great. That's it. That's all you get. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy.